Okay, we seem to have a problem with my sound. Yes, right. And as I was telling you, after the declaration of President Uhuru Kenyatta as president-elect in the just concluded presidential poll, opposition leader Raila Odinga insists the election cannot and will not be allowed to stand. The opposition has, however, not indicated whether or not they will challenge the result in court. But the big question we ask you tonight, which way Kenya? Talk to us. The hashtag is a big question on Twitter. You can text us on 22422. Now we speak to Suba MP John Badi and Uasin Gishu Woman Representative Gladys Sholei. We also speak to NCCK, National Council of Churches Deputy General Secretary. I said Secretary General before. It's
Deputy
General Secretary, Dr. Nelson Makanda. Thank you all for making time for us tonight. We heard from NASA leader Raila Odinga today, the much anticipated address, and you've outlined some issues and plans, including demonstrations and formation of people assemblies to ultimately bring about constitutional amendments and a task force to look into systemic governance weaknesses. And we'll talk about all that. But some or many would have assumed you'll talk about what to do in terms of, are you going to challenge this election that you're saying will not stand and you're not agreeing with?
Thank you very much, Hussein. First of all, allow me to join Kenyans in mourning the death of Bishop Korir, who is a great Kenyan. And I think at this time we needed him more. We needed his services much more than we would have imagined, but he's no longer with us. I also want to remember one of the Catholic priests who was killed in cold blood in Kisumu, around Kisumu area. That is Evans Juma, whose killers are still not yet known. It's a sad period for the Catholic Church and Kenyans in general. Let me also sympathize with those who lost their lives during this period of electioneering, agitating for reforms in the IBC. But I will also not forget Hussein to apologize on behalf of the NASA coalition for the incident that happened at Wiper House today, where one of your journalists and another one from the Nation Media Group was roughed up by some young men who are around there. We don't support that. Finally, if you
and we hope you're going to follow it up,
definitely,
as you promised, so that action can be taken here.
Our two principals spoke about, Raila Odinga and Musalia Mudavadi. But finally, if you allow me, let me also wish good luck to our candidates, both class standard E8 who are already doing their exams, and for the KCSE candidates who will be starting the exams next week. Having said that, I think, Hussein, we were very clear today. If you listened carefully to what Raila Odinga said, I think what we are going to exercise is now Article 1 of the Constitution that talks about the exercising of sovereign power, that the people of Kenya can exercise their sovereign power either directly or through their democratically elected representatives. From the county assembly level to the governor level, members of county assembly, the members of parliament, both Senate and National Assembly, and the governor, we will recognize the delegation of power to those organs. But to the presidency, no. And we are very clear as NASA coalition that a president has not been elected for this country and announced properly. The election, the purported election which was conducted on 26th, we don't recognize, and therefore the people of Kenya, in terms of exercising the executive authority, will decide to exercise their right or sovereign right or power directly without delegating it, because we haven't had an election which has produced the president that the people of Kenya expected. And how then are we going to exercise that power directly? We have talked about People's Assembly. The people of Kenya will now sit and discuss the way forward for this country.
Just describe for us what you mean when you say they'll sit.
It's simple. You'll get the details, but we are going to get People's Assembly where we'll get representatives from the counties, we'll have elected representatives, we'll have members of the civil society, we'll have representation from the church. We will basically have Kenyans speaking with Kenyans. All the issues that Kenyans would have discussed regarding governance will be discussed there. And by the way, that assembly will be just one of those processes that Kenyans are going to take in exercising their democratic right under Article 1 of the Constitution. I want to tell you that we have formed a national resistance movement. This is going to have now a task force, which is going to give periodically the events that we are going to do to resist this illegitimate and illegal government that is being forced on Kenyans.
Okay. Still to my question. Are you going to challenge this election?
As NASA?
Yes.
I don't think so. Any Kenyan has a democratic right to go to court to challenge the results that were announced yesterday. But as NASA, I don't think.
Why not? Why wouldn't you challenge it? I mean, you're at liberty to decide to do it or not, but you're saying, this election, you're not recognizing this election, the results will not stand, you're saying, you're demanding for a fresh election. IBC has declared Uhuru Kenyatta as the president-elect in a just concluded election that you did not participate in. So why wouldn't you challenge it if you're saying it's wrong?
You see, Hussein, we were in court. The Supreme Court made a determination. And there are grounds which they touched on. And Hussein, we are where we are again. So why should we again go back to disturb the Supreme Court? I think the bottom line is that there are people who are hell-bent in ensuring that there is no presidential election that is credible in this country. So no matter how many times you go to court, they will annul the result, we will end up where we are. So the best thing to do is for Kenyans to now exercise their democratic right directly and have these despotic leaders who don't want to leave power or don't want to have Kenya progress in terms of electoral reforms to give way for a more democratic system that Kenyans will now not have to go to court to challenge any presidential election. Okay. That immediately we finish the elections, then we will have Kenya moving forward because there is peace. But
you will support any individual organization that goes to court?
Why would we? Okay. I mean, anyone who wants to go to court can go to court. They have enough lawyers. The legal minds in this country are so many. So you don't have to always come to NASA to get the legal. Okay, Dr. Makani and Gladys, I'm coming to you shortly. But just let's take a look at President Kenyatta speaking yesterday. You would have thought he's expecting an election petition from how he was speaking. Let's watch.
Them go to court, let them do whatever they want. Nobody shall deny them of their constitutional right. Those issues we shall discuss later. As to my agenda going forward, I will discuss once the processes are over. I am not going to jump the gun.
What did you expect, Honorable Gladys Sholei, today, and how do you respond to NASA's way forward?
Okay, before I begin, I think I want to echo what Honorable Mbadi has said, to join the people of Uasin Gishu and Kenya in general in mourning the death of a great man, Bishop Korir. We're very privileged to have him, and this is the time we needed him. Mm-hmm. And I also want to congratulate the people of Kenya for exercising restraint during the time of the election. It was elections that were done under very difficult circumstances, but they were still able to turn out despite intimidation and threats. Many of them were able to come out, and I think it went better than we expected. Would have thought, because at least it was only 4 counties that eventually didn't vote, but all the others did come out despite the difficulties. And I think we must congratulate all those brave employees of the Electoral Commission who, at risk of their lives, did attempt to go into very dangerous places where their lives were at risk to be able to run the election. Just listening to Honorable Mbadi explaining about the statements that were made today by their party leader, I think it's a very sad time in Kenya, because once our political leaders begin to look for solutions that are outside the Constitution and outside the law, then we are really going on a slippery path. Because you must remember, the tactics that they describe that they want to undertake now are tactics that are for 1982, You know, when we were attempting coups in 1992, when we didn't have a constitution. But right now, we have a constitution that gives us enough methodologies within the constitution to be able to actually raise those issues that they are talking about. You no longer need to have a resistance militia because we have a constitution that allows us to go to a referendum and make constitutional amendments. We do have laws that are able to enable us to be able to reach out. People have more representation than they ever had before because of devolution. So there are solutions that are within our laws that we can go to. Also remember that at the time when NASA did go to court to nullify to petition for the nullification of the presidential election, they did it within the law, and that we respect. And I think that is where we must remain, that if you do not agree with the elections that were recently held, you can go to court. Anyone is entitled to go to court to petition the court.
They are afraid, as he says, of doing the same thing over and over again.
No, but we cannot say that we now must find a solution that is not within the law. Because remember, all of us fought to have this constitution so that we do not have to resort to violence or set up militias in order to get what we are demanding. I think that is not the right way to go. Because even when you think about it, even any suggestions that are being made about there has to be dialogue and so on, yes, you can have dialogue, but it has to be within the law. You cannot be able to push that. And we saw that even in America when Trump became president, there were riots in the streets, but they didn't give in to the riots. They insisted on following the law.
Okay.
And in this case, the nullification was given. The court ordered. You cannot celebrate the nullification and not celebrate the other part of the order that says that you should go to the election. Mm. And the court, again, did not say anyone else to conduct the election. It says IEBC to conduct the election. And you cannot, from the same breath, that you barricade polling stations, you ensure that there's so much violence that people are not able to go and vote, or people are intimidated not to go and vote. You also tell people that you have boycotted the election, therefore there is no need for a high turnout, because people assume in their own minds that if Raila Odinga has boycotted the election, then there is no competition. So they are trying to benefit from something that they created. They created the low turnout through intimidation and threats. They created the prevention of elections to continue in certain places. And then you cannot now, with the same breath, say you want to benefit
Are you concerned
from that disorder.
That some have said, including civil society and them, that Jubilee lacks broad public legitimacy with NASA, the closest challenger, having boycotted this election? You saw the division, and the division that is in this country right now.
Imagine, Hussein, if we were in a situation where every time I think I'm going to lose the election, I boycott the election and make it impossible for people in Uasin Gishu to be able to vote. And then I come back and say that person is not legitimately elected by court because I did not participate in the election. Remember, legitimacy comes from what does the law say? What does the law say about somebody being duly elected?
Okay.
So I think we cannot use that as an argument.
All right.
You see, Hussein, this discussion about why we didn't participate in the election, whether we were obeying the order halfway, this is something that has been canvassed too much, and I think it is repetitive. If you listen to Sholei, there's nothing new she's saying. In fact, she's just repeating what we have been saying in these shows for over and over again. I thought today we were going to discuss what is the way forward.
Exactly.
You did your election, so don't cry about it. You did it, whichever way you did. And we are saying we don't recognize it. So I don't know why this, why you are crying about it, that we should have done. So let me put it
so
this
the way forward is this.
For me, it's simple. I don't know where you are getting this idea that we are operating outside the law. I don't know who gave you the mandate to be the one determining who is operating outside the law and who is not operating within the law. Who told you that we are organizing militia? Is your understanding of national resistance movement equal to militia? then if that is your understanding, then you are misinformed.
And you are burning tires and causing mayhem.
You cannot come here and present your lack of information and understanding, and then you blame it on us. Your understanding of national resistance movement is faulty. If it is not propaganda, then it is faulty. I think you really need to understand. You can go into the history books and understand what is a resistance movement. You go and read about Mahatma Gandhi. We were not born then, but we still talk very passionately about him. He was basically leading a resistance movement. You go and read about Martin Luther King. You go and read recently about our Nelson Mandela of South Africa. So this notion that national resistance movement is all about militia, it is either propaganda or misinformation, which we are not responsible for. I want to tell you for a fact, Hussein, that there is nothing militia about national resistance movement.
Okay.
We are going to resist. It is a movement that is going to resist, one, electoral fraud, two, the governance that we don't agree
to. If Honorable Mbadi may allow me.
And
let me finish.
Actually,
just finish your point.
Finish.
If you could all allow Dr.
Makanda. Is that there is nothing militia. Actually, even the people you are talking of barricading roads, those are not militia. A militia is someone who is armed like a militia, for my understanding. And please, this idea of trying to refer to some section of this society as militia just because they are expressing themselves, it is again demeaning. It is again, in my view, condescending attitude.
All right. You're not calling them militia. You're saying people who barricaded the roads we saw during the election, they shouldn't be called militia.
Those are not militia. Those are Kenyans. Whether they are expressing themselves in a primitive manner
or
whatever they are doing is not. You cannot refer to those people as militia.
Right. Should you have reprimanded them for doing that? You told them, as your leader and as the leader said, Raila Odinga, stay at home, do not come out and vote. But they stopped the polling stations from being set up. Materials will not be moved from one area to another.
First of all, Hussein, have you bothered to ask yourself why Kenyans can go to that extent of blocking materials from being moved to the polling station? It's because of, this is a sign of desperation. These Kenyans have spoken. They have said, we don't want election. You are forcing them with election. What do you expect them to do? Worse still, just before the ballot materials are delivered, you escort those ballot materials like a military were being taken to an installation.
Okay.
What do you expect them to do?
I'll come back to that.
In fact, it is the government that has been organizing militia. If you look at the people who are going to
let the other guys respond
the real militia.
Okay, let the other guys very briefly.
Yeah, I think just to say this briefly, I don't know what other word you could possibly use when people are violently preventing officials from carrying out a constitutional mandate of setting up elections. Okay. When they are using stones, militia don't necessarily have to use AK-47s. Even a stone is a very dangerous weapon. When you find that they are burning tires and barricading the roads and actually beating up IEBC officials who are being trained, that is I don't know which other word you want to use. And I will say, and let's contrast this with the NASA supporters within Uasin Gishu County. The NASA supporters in Uasin Gishu County did not vote. And I spoke to a lot of them on polling day. And I met them and I said, why aren't you going to vote? And they said, don't worry, Mama, we voted for you, but we are not going to vote today. But they sat there. They never attacked anybody. They never fought anyone. They did not, and they were speaking to anybody who was passing by, who were going to vote. Oh, you guys are going to vote? Okay, us, we're not voting. So I think that is, for me, is it's a boycott. And those ones are exercised. They are not harming anybody. They did not prevent the polling stations from opening. And those are exactly, and that is what we should borrow a leaf from.
Okay.
Because that for me, they are not. Those ones are not militia. They were simply exercising their right because they have a right not to vote.
Dr. Makanda is the General Secretary, NCCK. I've avoided to involve you directly in that conversation because of the divisions you can see. You've proposed a way forward today. You've talked about several issues. How best do you think, when you're talking about dialogue, How best do you think that should be achieved?
I think to begin this discussion, it would be nice to say that as a religious fraternity, we are gripped with the grief after the loss of our colleague, Bishop Cornelius Korir, who was an icon in our efforts to help steer this country in the right direction. In fact, he chaired our dialogue reference group, and so we feel a great sorrow and loss. Allow me to ask that these two colleagues who represent two opposing sides, standing on the different ends of the continuum, opposing continuum sides, that perhaps in honor of Cornelius Korir, it would be nice for them, because they seem both to be concerned about Kenya. They seem both to be gripped by what is good for this country. And if that were the case, then it's possible to meet together and speak together and seek a solution that is amicable, since the views and the ideas they espouse and they seem to carry seem like they are ideas that can take Kenya forward, only that they are not agreeing to say what can we mutually work on here to resolve what's happening. And basically that's what we are calling this country to do. We are asking that having gone through the process that we have gone through from the beginning of this year, we have been in an electoral environment. Many things have happened. People have died, and regrettably so. We have used lots of resources as a nation. We have tried to keep to the provisions of the Constitution, as it were, to desire to have an electoral process that is honorable. And as I hear my colleagues here speaking, it's as it were trying to whip a dead horse, because some form of election has already happened, as was required by the Supreme Court. Whether that is legitimate or not is a question that can be determined as we go forward. And perhaps it's good to say that because a great section of this country did not participate, those Kenyans withdrew their endorsement of that process. And so to them, they are right when they say that the process and what has happened is not legitimate. But however, it would be nice to acknowledge that what was asked to be done by the Supreme Court, something has happened.
What you're saying, therefore, is both sides have a point.
Yes, both sides have a point.
Let's take a look at what the leadership of both sides actually said about dialogue recently. Raila Odinga, who spoke today, and he spoke also on Friday in Kawangware, and William Ruto, who spoke, we'll get this video courtesy of Al Jazeera News Network, during an interview. Let's watch.
Before engaging in any dialogue, we must also be clear what differences we are sitting down to resolve. The political crisis we are in is about free and fair elections, specifically and fundamentally about democracy, constitutionalism, and the rule of law. Supreme Court ordered a repeat election held in compliance with the Constitution and the law.
There will be no election in 90 days. There will be no discussion on matters to do with election. We will have dialogue with Mr. Odinga on other matters, not matters that have been settled by the people of Kenya in their supreme will in a ballot.
Right, so conditions already, if there is to be dialogue. Honorable Badi, I'll begin with you. The parameters are strictly what Raila has said to do with matters of election, constitutionalism, democracy, and the law.
You know, there's nothing wrong dialoguing or debating. Any people who live in a society must always constantly and continuously engage and talk. And actually that, I think, was what we called for immediately after the Supreme Court ruling, 1st September, when the elections of the president were annulled. We called for discussion on the way forward immediately, so we didn't waste time. But that both the Jubilee and the ABC didn't see it fit to engage us in that in dialogue at that point in time. But You see, the understanding of dialogue between Jubilee and NASA, we completely disagree on what they consider to be dialogue. Initially, the dialogue of Jubilee, they thought when we talk about dialogue, or it was propaganda, then we meant Nusu Mkati, or we want inclusion in government. I think now they have dropped it. I saw and I heard Ruto say that they are only ready to discuss Raila's retirement. That to me is an abuse and an insult to us as a NASA coalition. And as people of Kenya who have invested on Raila Odinga this much, Raila is not just his own person. He is our project. We have invested a lot in him emotionally, and we have brought him where he is. So for someone to stand somewhere and speak so carelessly that the discussion that they want for us to come out of this stalemate and political difficulty that we are facing is to discuss how Raila should retire.
Well, what would you want to discuss?
Our understanding of discussion is we want to discuss how to conduct a fresh election.
That is it.
And how to have credible election, because that is where we stopped. As a matter of fact, we even decided to go ahead and propose our irreducible minimums before election. But that was overtaken by events. Now, where we are saying any discussion that we are going to entertain as a coalition and what we are putting forward on the table is discussion around how to conduct fresh presidential election.
Honorable Shile, that's not what you want to discuss.
Yes.
From what the Deputy President has said.
Yeah. Okay, first of all, for me, my position is any discussions also has to be within the Constitution. You cannot begin, the law is clear. There is no other method of doing anything except that go to the elections, which have already been held. There was great attempts to ensure that the election ran well. The elections have happened. The president has been declared, Uhuru Kenyatta has been declared president-elect. We shall await the 14 days, whether they shall go to court or not. Yeah, and even if they do go to court, there will be another 14 days of the hearing of the matter, and the Supreme Court will make its own it will make a pronouncement at that time. That is will be in the hands of the court. And thereafter, if the courts, if they don't go to court, Uhuru Kenyatta shall be sworn in as president. If they don't go to court, I'm sorry, if they do go to court, we shall wait for the decision of the Supreme Court, and it shall be upheld. And life will move on. And then, if there is supposed to be any discussions on whether there should be reforms on certain institutions, the way you're saying, Buddy, that we need to look at our institutional reforms and so on, that again, the laws are so sufficient for us to undertake any reforms. Even reorganizing IEBC, the law is very clear on how IEBC should be reorganized. Okay. If it's about reorganizing the judicial system or amending the laws, again, we have sufficient provision for us to be able to do that. Right. So yes, it doesn't mean that if we proceed as we are going, none of those demands that you'd like to make them after we finish this process of election. Because yes, we can have a discussion about it. And we can't say that the dialogue is going on up to now, even now. Even now, Buddy, you and me are talking. We are dialoguing, isn't it? There's discussions every day relating to issues. And I think Kenyans are becoming more clearer on what is happening. And I think it's not that there's no dialogue going on. So I do not know why we need a special event to be able to have dialogue. Yeah. And I think, again, Honorable Mbadi, what I'd really request you is how come when something is said, you say, oh, that's an insult, okay? I'm not that sensitive. Just now you called me ignorant, but I'm not taking offense, because that is part of the discussions we have here every day. And I'm a politician. People are allowed to say things about me. So I think we should not constantly say, that's an insult. I think you're being offensive. These are discussions we're having.
Yeah. You know, I said either it was propaganda or ignorance. I gave you that space. But let me put it this way. You know, this talk of Uhuru Kenyatta will be sworn in, then life will go on. Accept and move on. Let me assure you, Gladys, we are not going to accept.
No, the reforms can go on after.
Let me tell you, which reforms are you talking about? In fact, if you look at our irreducible minimums, there is no reform in it. What we are basically dealing with is mismanagement of a process. In fact, we finished We brought in good reforms in 2016 when we amended the law. What has happened is the interference by people who don't want credible, transparent, accountable elections to be conducted in this country. That is what we wanted to discuss. What is the way forward? Now that we are very clear that there are some individuals who decided to mismanage otherwise what would have otherwise been a very
So
good
what would you like
process.
to have?
What we would have, it's already in our irreducible minimums if you cared to read them. We were very clear on what we wanted to be done, a lot of which have been overtaken by events. We talked about even who is to print these ballot papers, who is to bring the technology. Those are now
no, I'm not talking about that. I'm saying now going forward.
Going forward, what we need to discuss is how then do we have a credible election in this country? That is a discussion that Kenyans need.
So are you seeking a repeat election or what is it?
They're very clear. They've been saying they want another election.
There has been no election since the Supreme Court ordered for a repeat election. You decided to organize a sham election. Gladys, let me tell you one thing. Please, ask yourself. I know the Jubilee people are very fond of saying that elections were conducted on 26. Kenyans came out, it was beyond our expectation. What is beyond your expectation when 4%, even with the figures of Chebukati, which are still disputable, 4% of people in Vihiga, 4% of people in Makueni, 6% of people in Busia, 6% of people in Kilifi, 6% in Kakamega, 8% in Mombasa. Kwale is 13%.
Okay.
You know, you cannot justify.
But no one.
We are going to have a president. We are going to have a president who is going to govern this country with 6% of votes cast for him in a county and only two regions in this country.
You withdrew from the election in any case.
I want my sister here to get this very clearly. Because, you know, this idea of chest thumping and believing that you can load it on Kenyans, it is not going to work. Okay. There are Kenyans who believe they have been shortchanged in this exercise and they are not going to move on. If you think that by swearing in Uhuru Kenyatta at Kasarani will make this country move forward, then you wait and see. This country is not going to move forward in that direction. We are going to move forward at our own terms also.
But what do you mean by that, Honorable Mbadi?
Because we have also to be considered, Hussein. This country does not belong to just two individuals or two communities. It belongs to all of us.
Okay.
Why do you think the people of Kilifi are now talking very passionately about seceding? It's because they are tired. So how we cannot sit here and pretend that everything is
So the divisions in this country are quite clear. Dr. Makanda, one of the things you have proposed today, and as again, you just try and help us with the solution because you're talking about dialogue, is that you're proposing an expansion of the executive to include position of Prime Minister and 2 deputies and restoring the position of the official leader of opposition. How do you think this will help?
Allow me to begin by saying that what we are proposing, one, is not a nusu mkate arrangement. I think it's good to make that clear. But also, it would be nice for me to mention that listening to my colleagues and listening to even the clips that you have played, everybody is referring to Kenyans. And so sometimes it's a little confusing. Who are these Kenyans? Because if Honorable Raila stands up and says Kenyans, His Excellency stands up and says Kenyans, Mbandi sits and says Kenyans, Madam Shole sits and says Kenyans, I think we must come to a point whereby we agree and define who is this Kenyans that we are talking about. Because if indeed that adjective, Kenyans, describes the same person, I think we must get a sense of agreement.
Okay.
And NCCK and religious leaders are speaking and saying, because there's been a sense of exclusion from the center of government, it appears that communities want to feel that they are part of government. And as it were, what is happening, some people are feeling this government is only of so-and-so, these two communities or these two individuals, and it's an arrangement of the Constitution. A proposal that NCCK is putting forward, is it possible for us to consider how we can expand government, particularly the political arm of the executive, so that then the executive seems to carry a little more weight politically in terms of bringing in a little more communities, so that then you are not always pointing hands and fingers.
That ultimately that will depend on whoever is in power, isn't it? And whatever they'll do with it. I'll read a tweet very quickly.
It will be an argument.
Mildred Ndeti on Twitter says, the problem is not the constitution and positions, it's a dishonest problem in hearts of men gone wild. So let's not talk about now, let's talk about maybe 20 years from now when we have such a situation. What would stop a president then from giving those positions still to the people, or still to his allies? Because you're talking about appointing.
The hearts of men require some guidance. There is no time that the hearts of men are going to be so pure that they will not have a selfish interest. The modality of coming to the point of expanding that executive does not have to come through appointing. It can be that these positions are placed in the constitution, and people go and converse as a team. The president and his deputy, and the person designated as prime minister, as deputy prime minister, and deputy prime minister go out there and converse as a team together, so that they bring this interest together. But also bring in the opposition to dignify opposition, so that then the leaders of opposition do not feel that they have no space to speak because they are not acknowledged formally. And so acknowledging them formally and dignifying them makes their voters, the 6 million voters, because if 6 million voters gave Raila their vote and somebody else who is a governor got 45,000 votes only, but he's honored, he is respected within the society. So I think let's talk as Kenyans and say there's a miss. We have run this constitution for 7 years. It is time for us to look back and begin to say, are there things that need to be fixed as a country?
That's why, Daktari, I think the ideas you're giving are good, but again, we must tell ourselves, for that to happen, for those great ideas that you're giving, there has to be amendments to the laws, amendments to the constitution.
Certainly, yes.
And we have to stick within that, because we have a constitution. We cannot be running there's no point having a constitution and then it becomes something you negotiate at the side.
No, we haven't said that
the constitution.
We will do that without amending the constitution.
And that is why we said, let us follow the law. The elections have happened. If there is any conversations after whether there are any amendments that need to be made, once Parliament is sitting, then we are able to have those conversations.
All right.
Because then that way we remain faithful to the Constitution. If there'll be, and I think if you look at our history, we have been improving our processes and our systems and our institutions over time. It's a process, it's not an event, it's not going to happen overnight. And that's why, even if you look at recently when the elections were held, yes, NASA gave its irreducible minimums. Some of them were met. Some may not have been met because it was impossible because the time was short. But they were mitigated sufficiently for us to be able to say they have been honored. And that's why you find that there were changes in the transmission system. There were amendments to the process that were being done. And that's why you saw the chairman this time, because that is one of the issues that had been raised by NASA, that he announced the results before all the Form 34s were in. This time, he was extremely careful to ensure that he waited until all the forms had arrived at Bomas. So yes, he met you halfway. And I think we should be able to recognize that and be honest about it and said, yes, some things were indeed met. And as we go forward, if there anything else that has been left behind, that has not been done yet, I believe there is still room to ensure that we do these things.
And I now have my time.
Yes.
Okay, you see,
as you wind up,
two things. Number one, on this issue of what Chebukati did yesterday, from 26th, about the forms, I don't think that is what we wanted. We were very clear. Actually, Chebukati always gets things wrong. He was told to scan and send electronically scanned copies simultaneously, not to have people run around from
but they were indeed scanned
from Wasingishu,
but they were
physical forms which were being changed on the way, and you saw how Alice Wahome was messing around with the electoral with an official. But anyway, I don't want to go there. You see, when you look at and I'm very happy that NCCK spoke the way they did. This has just confirmed what we said today about People's Assembly. NCCK actually should be the first group to second their membership to our People's Assembly. Because you are saying we need to discuss as a country that we need reforms. All these things you are saying.
Yeah, you have a job, Daktari.
we need a forum where we discuss these things. You cannot just say them there and then they become law. That is why we are forming a People's Assembly, so that we have representatives from the religious groups, the civil society. If I have a perfect idea of how to amend the constitution, create those positions, if that is what Kenyans want, bring it on.
Thank you so much.
I'm for the debate.
But we have a methodology for doing that.
We'll have to wind it up there, but finally, Nelson Makanda, and for the record, of course, when they were talking, they were not talking about, they were talking about a negotiated position, isn't it?
Yes.
That will be approached by everyone.
Yes. Really, we are thinking about a bipartisan process. We are thinking about a process that is all-inclusive, because this country can only go forward if all of us sit together and agree on what can take this country forward. And we are pleading with the president, we are pleading with Honorable Raila, we are pleading with NASA and Jubilee. Please think about this country. These people you are calling Kenyans, think about them. Let's do what is best for this country. And if
under the constitution.
I mean, however it comes up,
what is this that
we shall agree.
We're studying it all over again. But thank you so much, Nelson Makanda, General Secretary, NCCK, Honorable Mbadi and Honorable Shilei. Thank you so much for making time for us tonight. Let's take a look finally at a sample of your tweets again before we wind up. We have Kevin Sadi says, Kenya needs to move on. We can't eat politics. We can't do politics through our dialogue, please. They're pleading with you. Mwaluma Valerie, dialogue between Uhuru and Raila, whatever they decide, we should accept and move on. Again, they're pleading with you as a country. No room for fresh elections. And Hafiz Mohammed, let's amend the constitution, make the presidency and all other elected positions less powerful and unattractive. Allocate 80% of GDP to devolution. Okay, interesting proposals. Calvin Ojenge says free, fair and credible elections will make even a member of the 44th tribe of Kenya be the president of this great nation. Fix it, he says. And Andrew Rainey, accommodate the opposition leader in the government. Okay, thank you so much for your tweets and for watching The Big Question. Again, thank you to our guests for making time for us tonight. Thank you for watching. I'm Hussein Mohammed. Have a good night.